The quiet world of Elias. The rapid flutter of Elias's fingertips on the keyboard dominated the hush of his small, precisely ordered apartment. Late afternoon sunbeams sliced through the window, illuminating swirling dust motes, the faded spine of a treasured leather volume on his shelf, and the faint wisp of steam from his neglected mug of herbal tea. He paused, his gaze tracing the emerging tapestry of words on the screen, thoughts coalescing into narratives, then realms. This was his sanctuary, a hushed dominion where imagination reigned. He drew a slow, fortifying breath, the mingled scents of aging paper and cool tea a comforting anchor. Solitude, for Elias, wasn't a burden. It was a fertile ground, allowing him to discern the nascent whispers of characters, to chart the intricate contours of their lives with an archaeologist's delicate precision. He revered words, their substance, their inherent music, their power to bridge disparate concepts or dismantle preconceptions with a solitary, well-placed syllable. To sculpt them, to coax them into weaving a tale, was his deepest fulfillment. The blank page held an innate candor, a silent invitation to create, which he honored daily with a near-sacred devotion. His apartment, nestled on the third floor of a venerable pre-war building, served as a buffer against the city's relentless pulse. Still, even here, a subtle, almost imperceptible thrum vibrated through the floorboards, the distant groan of a bus, the fading wail of a siren swallowed by the urban hum. It was a sound he'd come to accept, a gentle reminder of the vibrant, yet bustling life beyond his quiet haven. He rarely ventured deep into its heart, preferring the measured cadence of his own days, punctuated by excursions to the neighborhood bookstore or the farmer's market for fresh provisions. Today, though, that distant thrum carried a novel resonance, a subtle undercurrent that teased at the edges of his focus. He dismissed it, plunging back into the unfolding narrative on his screen. His protagonist, a solitary cartographer, stood at a precipice, on the cusp of an unforeseen odyssey. Elias felt an affinity with him, recognizing the quiet hunger for discovery that often lay beneath a tranquil exterior. He typed another paragraph, then another, the story flowing effortlessly, a river carving its destined course. The mantelpiece clock chimed softly, breaking his immersion. 6 o'clock. He stretched, a satisfying release of tension in his neck and shoulders. His fingers, still hovering over the keys, tingled with the residual energy of creation. He rose, approaching the window, drawing aside the sheer curtain. Below, streetlights began to ignite, casting elongated, distorted shadows. People hurried past, their faces blurred by distance and the gathering twilight. Each individual, Elias knew, carried their own intricate story, their own secluded world. He often mused about them, about the untold narratives unfolding just beyond his windowpane. He prepared a simple meal, pasta with pesto and cherry tomatoes, and ate slowly, savoring each bite. The silence now felt different, imbued with a pleasant fullness from the afternoon's labors. He picked up a poetry collection and immersed himself in its verses, the words a gentle counterpoint to his own. He was profoundly content with this rhythm, this life he had meticulously shaped. It was a life built on observation, on quiet understanding, on the profound beauty of unspoken truths. He saw himself as a silent witness to the world, and in that role he discovered his greatest strength. He could listen, truly listen, to the nuances of another's heart, even when they themselves struggled to articulate its ache. It was a skill he treasured, a quiet offering he extended to the few who found their way into his carefully constructed piece. The city continued its distant, unobtrusive song. Elias finished his tea, its warmth spreading through him. He had no premonition of how soon that quiet hum would escalate into a roar, nor how profoundly the stillness he cherished would be shattered. He knew only the peaceful satisfaction of a day well spent, the quiet joy of a story nearing completion, and the comforting promise of another just beginning to stir. Connor's bright future. Connor Davies leaned forward, practically vibrating with suppressed energy, his grin stretching from ear to ear as he pushed his phone across the polished cafe table. "Look at these, Mark. Sarah picked the venue. Can you believe it? The Grand Oak Ballroom, just like she always dreamed." Mark, a mutual acquaintance from their shared gym, politely took the phone, his eyes scanning the glossy images of a magnificent hall draped in fairy lights and white roses. "Very grand, Connor. And a lot of oak." "Right. And the caterer does this incredible truffle risotto," Sarah insisted. "Said it was a non-negotiable. She's so good at all this, you know? The details, the planning. I just show up, look handsome, and say, I do." Connor laughed, a loud booming sound that made a few patrons glance over. He didn't notice. He was too busy being happy. He retrieved his phone, swiping through more photos. A close-up of a tiered cake that looked more like a sculpture than dessert. A panoramic shot of rolling vineyards they'd considered for the honeymoon. A candid of Sarah laughing, her auburn hair catching the light. "Honestly, Mark, it's all coming together perfectly. We've been together since university, practically inseparable. This is it, you know? The big one. House in the suburbs, 2 kids, maybe a golden retriever named Barkley." He paused, a dreamy look in his bright blue eyes. "That's our future. It's idyllic." Mark nodded, stirring his coffee. "Sounds like you've got it all figured out, Connor. A real storybook ending." "Exactly." Connor slapped the table lightly, a jolt of pure joy running through him. "We're meant to be. It just feels right. Every decision, every compromise, it all just clicks. Sarah's the most sensible woman I know. She keeps me grounded. And I keep her laughing. It's a good balance." He leaned back, finally taking a sip of his now lukewarm latte. "Even Elias has been giving us his quiet approval. You know Elias, right? Lives a few doors down from me. He's the quiet type, keeps to himself mostly, but he's a good friend. He just nods and offers one of his cryptic smiles when I tell him about the wedding plans, but I know he's happy for us. He sees it too. The perfection of it all." A server approached to clear a nearby table, and Connor, however the people person, flashed her a dazzling smile. She smiled back, a little shyly. He loved that. Loved making people happy. Making them feel seen. It was effortless for him. "Seriously, though," he turned back to Mark, his voice softening just a fraction. "I can't imagine anything else. This life, with Sarah, it's everything I've ever wanted. Stability, love, a clear path forward. No surprises, just happiness. A bright, uncomplicated future." He gestured vaguely with his hand, encompassing the cafe, the street outside, the entire world. "It's all laid out, clear as day, and I'm ready for it. More than ready." His enthusiasm was infectious, and Mark found himself smiling genuinely. "Well, congratulations, Connor. To you and Sarah. Sounds like you've hit the jackpot." "I really have," Connor agreed, his gaze drifting out the window, a self-satisfied, almost serene expression settling on his face. He saw a couple walking hand in hand, a dog straining at its leash, a child pointing at a particularly vibrant flower. It all seemed to fit into the narrative he was building, a world designed for contentment, for the kind of straightforward joy he felt bubbling within him. There was no room for doubt, no space for shadows in his meticulously planned, brightly lit future. A shattered engagement. A violent thud against the door rattled Elias's apartment, startling him from the quiet hum of his refrigerator. He'd been in the middle of preparing a simple dinner, the scent of sautéing garlic just beginning to fill the small space. Before he could even register who might be calling at such an hour, the door burst inward, revealing Connor. Connor wasn't just at the door. He was practically in the apartment, his usually meticulously styled hair askew, eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears. His face, normally flushed with an infectious enthusiasm, was pale and blotchy. He clutched a crumpled tissue in one hand, the other jammed into his pocket. Elias had never seen him look so utterly undone. "Connor! What in the, Elias trailed off, his own knife-wielding hand freezing mid-chop. The words died in his throat as Connor stumbled forward, looking like a man who'd just walked through a hurricane. He smelled faintly of stale coffee and something else Elias couldn't quite place. Desperation, perhaps. Connor's chest heaved, a raw, choked sound escaping his throat. It's over." Elias dropped the knife onto the cutting board with a clatter that seemed deafening in the sudden silence. He moved instantly, me closing the door and guiding Connor, who seemed to be moving on autopilot, towards the worn armchair in the corner of the living room. Elias didn't ask what was over. The answer was etched onto Connor's devastated face. "Sarah." Elias's voice was softer than he intended, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy Connor radiated. Connor nodded mutely, sinking into the armchair as if his legs had given out. He buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with silent sobs that racked his entire frame. The crumpled tissue was now forgotten, slipping from his grasp to land on the rug like a discarded flag of surrender. Elias knelt beside him, a hand hovering uncertainly over Connor's back. He wasn't one for grand gestures or effusive declarations. But the sight of his usually boisterous friend, reduced to such raw anguish, twisted something inside him. "What happened? Are you okay?" he asked, the questions feeling woefully inadequate in the face of such profound distress. Connor slowly lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed and bloodshot. She called it off. The wedding. Everything." His voice was thick, each word a struggle. "Just like that. No warning, no fight. Just, Connor, I can't do this." And then she was gone. He gestured vaguely, as if Sarah had simply evaporated into thin air. Elias listened, his expression a mixture of shock and profound sadness. He knew Sarah. She was a practical, thoughtful woman, not prone to dramatics. For her to end things so abruptly, it must have been a decision she'd wrestled with for a long time. But that thought offered little comfort to the man weeping uncontrollably in his armchair. She said we weren't right for each other," Connor continued, his voice cracking. "That I had this idea of a life, and she didn't fit into it. My perfect picture of a suburban house and 2 kids and a golden retriever. She said it wasn't her picture." He looked at Elias, a desperate plea in his gaze. "But it was her picture. She helped me pick out the backsplash. She loved the truffle risotto." Elias reached out, finally placing a comforting hand on Connor's shoulder. The fabric of his shirt was damp beneath his palm. Sometimes people change their minds, Connor. It doesn't mean it was your fault, or that it wasn't real while it lasted." Connor shook his head vigorously, fresh tears welling. "But it was real. It was. We were supposed to be forever. Our storybook ending. She just shattered it." He slumped back, the force of his grief seeming to drain all the energy from his body. The vibrant, optimistic Connor, the man who'd planned every detail of his future with such unwavering certainty, was gone, replaced by a shell-shocked stranger. Elias remained beside him, a silent, steadfast presence in the wreckage of Connor's world. The garlic scent had faded, replaced by the heavy, metallic tang of tears. Tea and tears. The clatter of the kettle against the stovetop was a small, sharp sound in the otherwise suffocating silence of Elias's apartment. He moved with a practiced slowness, measuring out Earl Grey leaves into the ceramic pot, his movements precise and deliberate. Connor sat slumped on the sofa, a crumpled tissue clutched in his hand, his usually vibrant face now a mask of raw confusion and pain. The initial torrent of disbelief had receded, leaving behind a hollow ache that seemed to radiate from his very core. Elias placed a steaming mug of tea, sweetened with a single spoon of honey and a slice of lemon, into Connor's trembling hands. "Drink this," he murmured, his voice soft, a stark contrast to Connor's earlier frantic outburst. "It'll warm you." Connor took a tentative sip, the fragrant steam rising to mist his eyes further. He stared into the swirling amber liquid as if searching for answers within its depths. "I don't understand, Elle. We were perfect. The invitations went out last week. The caterers are booked. Her dress. She loved her dress." His voice cracked, the words catching in his throat. "She just looked at me and said, 'I can't do this.'" Connor. Like I was a stranger. Like everything we had, everything we planned, was just a bad dream. Elias settled into the armchair opposite, his gaze steady and unwavering on his friend. He didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. He simply listened, a silent anchor in Connor's storm. The soft glow of the bedside lamp cast long shadows across the room, highlighting the fine lines of worry etched around Connor's eyes. "We'd picked out the hymns, you know," Connor continued, his voice gaining a desperate edge, as if reciting these details would somehow make sense of the senseless. "She even got excited about the napkins." "Napkins, Elle? Who gets excited about napkins?" "Sarah did. She said they were the perfect shade of dusty rose." He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, a gesture of profound helplessness. What did I do? Was it something I said? Something I didn't say? I swear, I thought we were happier than we'd ever been. The rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner filled the pauses. A steady heartbeat against Connor's unraveling. Elias reached for a spare throw blanket draped over the back of the armchair, and without a word, unfolded it and gently placed it over Connor's shoulders. The gesture was small, yet it spoke volumes of quiet care. Connor looked up, his eyes red-rimmed, and offered a weak, grateful nod. "I just keep replaying everything," Connor confessed, his voice barely above a whisper now. "Every conversation, every laugh, every fight, trying to find the moment it went wrong. Was there a sign I missed? A tiny crack in the foundation I was too stupid to see?" He took another long, shuddering breath. "Yeah, it feels like my whole future, the one I've been building for years, just evaporated, like smoke." Elias remained silent, allowing Connor the space to vocalize the swirling chaos within him. He understood that sometimes the most profound comfort wasn't found in words, but in the unwavering presence of someone who genuinely cared. He watched as Connor slowly sipped his tea, the warmth seeming to seep into him, steadying his hands, if not his heart. The apartment, usually a haven of quiet contemplation for Elias, had become a sanctuary for his friend's raw grief, a temporary refuge from a world that had suddenly turned cold and unfamiliar. Late-night confessions. The weeks blurred into a rhythm Elias hadn't anticipated. The sharp clang of his doorbell, usually an unwelcome interruption to his solitary evenings, became a familiar, almost comforting chime around 7 o'clock. It was Connor, always Connor, a shadow of his former self, carrying a six-pack of craft beer and a weary sigh. Elias would simply nod, stepping aside to let him in, the unspoken agreement hanging heavy in the air. This was Connor's sanctuary now. They fell into a routine. Elias would make tea, chamomile for Connor, black for himself, and they would gravitate towards the worn leather sofa in the living room. The silence would stretch, comfortable for Elias, but clearly an effort for Connor, who would eventually break it with a recounting of his day. Not the grand, effusive tales of old, but fragmented narratives of cancelled vendor appointments, awkward encounters with sympathetic colleagues, and the crushing weight of empty hours. One Tuesday, after a particularly disjointed account of trying to return Sarah's grandmother's antique lace veil, Connor leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "You know, sometimes I feel like I'm wearing a costume." he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. This whole Connor persona, the outgoing one, the happy one, the one who always knew what he wanted. Elias, who had been absently tracing the rim of his mug, looked up. He didn't speak, just offered a soft, questioning hum. I remember when I was a kid, Connor continued, a tremor in his voice. My dad always told me to be tough, to always have a plan. I hated it. I just wanted to build forts in the woods and catch frogs. But I learned to pretend, to be what everyone expected. And I thought with Sarah, I finally was that person, that the pretending was over. He scrubbed a hand over his face, a raw, exposed gesture. Now, I don't even know who I am without the wedding, without her. Elias listened, his gaze steady, understanding. He didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. He just existed in that space with Connor, a silent anchor in a turbulent sea. This was a new layer of Connor, peeled back piece by painful piece. Not the confident, boisterous friend who had always effortlessly commanded attention, but a fragile, searching soul. The conversations deepened with each passing night. The initial shock of the wedding's cancellation receded, replaced by a slow, agonizing reevaluation of Connor's entire life. He spoke of his parents' expectations, the pressure he'd felt to pursue a respectable career instead of his fleeting artistic passions, the subtle ways he'd always felt just a little bit out of sync with the world around him, even when he seemed to be thriving. Remember that time in college when I dated Jessica? Connor asked one evening, a faint smile touching his lips. Everyone said we were perfect. She was beautiful, smart, laughed at all my terrible jokes. But I always felt like I was performing, like I was trying to convince myself more than I was trying to convince her. Elias remembered Jessica. He'd thought she was a good match for Connor at the time, seeing only the surface-level compatibility. Now, through Connor's retrospective lens, he saw the cracks. I just wanted to be happy, Elias, Connor confessed late one night. The city lights a muted glow beyond the window. He had been talking about the pressure he felt to always project an image of effortless joy. But what if I've been looking for happiness in all the wrong places? What if the whole blueprint I had for my life was just borrowed? He turned to face Elias, his eyes wide and vulnerable in the dim light. What if I don't even know what my happiness looks like? Elias met his gaze, a profound empathy swirling within him. He saw not just a heartbroken man, but a man unmoored, adrift from a life he'd meticulously constructed. And in that shared vulnerability, something subtle, yet powerful, began to shift between them. The friendship, once defined by shared histories and easy banter, was deepening, stretching into new, uncharted territory. Elias felt a quiet protectiveness bloom in his chest, a fierce desire to help Connor navigate this terrifying, necessary unraveling. He didn't know where it would lead, but he knew, with a certainty that hummed in his bones, that he would be there. An unexpected warmth. The scent of brewing coffee, rich and earthy, filled Elias's kitchen, a comforting anchor in the quiet morning. Connor sat at the small round table, a mug cradled between his hands, watching Elias move about the space. Elias, typically lost in the quiet rhythm of his own world, seemed to carry a different kind of calm this morning, one that resonated with the gentle light filtering through the window. He was meticulously arranging a bowl of fruit, the apples and oranges gleaming under his careful touch. Connor found himself observing Elias with an intensity that surprised him. It wasn't the familiar appreciation for a friend's hospitality, nor the gratitude that had filled him in the initial days of his shattered world. This was something new, a subtle hum beneath the surface of his still-present grief. He watched as Elias paused, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips as he straightened a dislodged berry. It was a private smile, not meant for anyone. Yet Connor felt a strange possessiveness about having witnessed it. He'd known Elias for years, had seen him laugh, seen him thoughtful, seen him exasperated. But he couldn't recall ever noticing the particular curve of his mouth, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when a quiet amusement took hold. It was a gentle smile, a warm tide against the harsh rocks of Connor's own recent past. A warmth bloomed in Connor's chest, soft and unexpected, like a forgotten ember suddenly rekindling. He shifted in his seat, the wooden chair creaking faintly. Elias turned then, catching Connor's gaze. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice low, a familiar comfort. Connor nodded, perhaps a little too quickly. "Yeah, just thinking." Elias returned to the counter, pouring himself a mug of coffee. As he did, a stray lock of dark hair fell across his forehead, and he absently pushed it back with the back of his hand, a gesture so ordinary, yet it snagged Connor's attention. The simple movement, the almost domestic intimacy of it, stirred another ripple in the quiet pool of Connor's emotions. This new warmth wasn't fleeting. It was settling in, like a cat finding a sunny spot. Later that afternoon, they were in the living room. Elias was engrossed in a book, the soft rustle of turning pages the only sound. Connor, ostensibly reading a magazine, found his eyes drifting from the glossy pages to Elias. The way the afternoon sun highlighted the faint stubble along Elias's jaw, the slight furrow in his brow as he concentrated, the relaxed posture of his shoulders. Every detail seemed newly illuminated, infused with an unfamiliar significance. He tried to dismiss it as the lingering tenderness of a broken heart, the natural inclination to seek comfort in a steadfast presence. But this wasn't about being comforted. It was about noticing the precise shade of grey in Elias's sweater, the way his thumb rested on the spine of the book, the quiet peace that radiated from him. A memory flashed into his mind, a conversation with Sarah months ago about their future. He'd felt a deep, abiding contentment then, a sense of rightness that had been the bedrock of his world. He'd loved Sarah with an open, eager heart, a love that felt like a vibrant, sun-drenched landscape. The warmth he felt for Elias now was different. It wasn't the expansive, outward-looking joy of his engagement. This was an inward heat, a contained glow, like holding a smooth, warm stone in his hand. It was quieter, more subtle, but undeniably potent. He closed his magazine, the soft thud startling Elias slightly. Elias looked up, his expression questioning. Connor met his gaze, a slight flush creeping up his neck. The feeling, this gentle, persistent warmth, wasn't a shadow of his grief for Sarah. It was entirely its own entity, unfolding within him, distinct and undeniably present. It was confusing, almost alarming, yet also strangely alluring. A shifting perspective. The silence in his apartment, once a comforting embrace, now felt cavernous. Connor paced, a restless energy thrumming beneath his skin. It was late. The city outside hummed a muted lullaby, yet his mind fixated on a singular, unexpected presence. Elias. He pictured Elias in his own quiet sanctuary, perhaps hunched over a keyboard, or lost in the pages of a well-loved book. A mug of lukewarm tea his silent companion. A peculiar yearning, not for conversation, but simply for proximity, settled within him. What occupied Elias when he wasn't patiently absorbing Connor's endless worries? Did he ever experience this quiet intensity? He paused by the window, gazing at the distant, sparkling lights. For years, his life had followed a meticulously plotted trajectory. Sarah, their wedding, the house with the sprawling garden, children. A tidy, brightly lit future, constructed from societal blueprints and his own youthful idealism. He had loved Sarah, truly, deeply, with a bright, effervescent joy that felt like pure sunshine. But now, in the aftermath of the storm, as the dust began to settle, he perceived hairline fractures in that foundation of joy. Was it truly profound love, or merely the comfort of a perfect narrative he'd been eager to inhabit. A memory surfaced, sharp and vivid. Sarah, head thrown back, her laughter like wind chimes. He'd cherished that sound. He'd adored how she brightened every room, the very idea of their shared future. But he realized, with a sudden unsettling clarity, that while Sarah had illuminated his world, Elias seemed to comprehend it, even the unarticulated corners. He padded into the kitchen, the cool tile under his bare feet a grounding sensation. He poured a glass of water, the clinking of ice cubes shockingly loud in the stillness. He thought of Elias's eyes, not the piercing gaze of a lover, but something deeper, more expansive. Those eyes held a patient curiosity, a silent invitation to unravel. Elias never prodded, never offered glib reassurances. He simply saw. Connor recalled a conversation with Sarah about his career anxieties. She had listened, offered practical advice, then swiftly diverted to their wedding plans, eager to steer them back to a cheerful course. It was supportive, in its own way, but it left a small, unaddressed knot in his stomach. With Elias, the dynamic shifted. Elias wouldn't offer quick fixes. He'd simply sit with the discomfort, allowing Connor to explore its contours, to voice his fears without the pressure to banish them. In those silences, in that shared wait, Connor felt truly heard. He swirled the water in his glass, watching the ice diminish. He'd always prided himself on his openness, his ability to connect. Yet, now, a profound inadequacy gnawed at him. Had he truly been open with Sarah? Had he allowed himself to be seen? Or had he presented a curated version, one that fit neatly into their perfect life? The thought was unsettling, like encountering a stranger in a familiar reflection. The realization that Elias understood him better than anyone, perhaps even better than he understood himself, bloomed in his chest, warm and insistent. It wasn't a romantic understanding, not yet, not as he defined it. It was something more foundational, like finally unearthing the missing piece of a complex puzzle. It made him question everything he thought he knew about intimacy, about connection, about what he truly craved in another person. The bright, straightforward path he'd envisioned for his life, now twisted and forked, disappearing into an uncharted wilderness. And the only familiar landmark in the shifting landscape was Elias. He set the glass down, the sound echoing in the quiet. The truth was, he missed Elias, missed the quiet presence, the steady gaze, the unspoken understanding. It was a longing that felt utterly new, distinct from the ache for Sarah, separate from the sting of shattered dreams. It was a longing for a different kind of warmth, a different kind of light. As the hours crept by, the moon casting long shadows across his floor, Connor found himself wondering, and with a strange mix of fear and exhilaration, what exactly that light might illuminate. Fear and retreat, Elias's familiar ping, once a welcome punctuation mark in Connor's meticulously curated days, now felt like a gentle probe, a question he was ill-equipped to answer. "Coffee tomorrow? My usual spot?" The message read, disarmingly casual. Connor's gaze lingered on the words, the warmth of the invitation battling the sudden chill that snaked through him. He tapped out a swift refusal. Can't. Packed day. Deadline looming. It wasn't a complete fabrication. His workload had indeed intensified, yet an hour could have easily been carved out. He simply didn't wish to. Days later, another message arrived. Thought about that old bookstore downtown. Remember the one with the dusty philosophy section? Felt like you'd appreciate it. This time, Connor concocted a more elaborate alibi. A surprise family dinner, even adding a saccharine smiley face to mask the churning unease. He found himself subtly altering his routine, avoiding their usual haunts, taking circuitous routes home, and letting calls drift to voicemail. The quiet intimacy he'd once cherished now felt like an uncomfortably bright spotlight. Their dynamic shifted subtly. a gradual unraveling of the comfortable bond they'd forged. Each parried invitation, each tepid response, gnawed at the easy banter that had once flowed effortlessly. Connor felt like a tightrope walker, every step a deliberate act of maintaining distance. He'd always prided himself on his unwavering self-assurance, his clear trajectory through life as an outgoing, successful, straight man on the verge of marriage. That narrative, that once so solid, now fractured, and the source of the cracks was Elias. He'd catch himself replaying their conversations, the late-night disclosures, the meaningful silences. He remembered the fleeting pressure of Elias's hand on his shoulder, a brief, comforting touch that had sent an unexpected tremor through him. It wasn't merely comfort he felt anymore. It was something deeper, more visceral, and utterly terrifying. His mind, accustomed to neat classifications, struggled to process this unwelcome data. Attraction to Elias, his best friend. The notion was a jarring dissonance, a betrayal of everything he thought he understood about himself. He'd spend restless nights gazing at the ceiling, dissecting every glance, every word exchanged. His attraction to women had always been uncomplicated, an undeniable, natural current. This was different, a slow burn, a quiet yearning that had crept up on him, disguised as friendship, as solace. The realization hit him with a cold shock, leaving him breathless and disoriented. What did this imply for his past relationships, for his entire understanding of love and desire? The carefully constructed edifice of his identity felt like it was crumbling, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. Elias, for his part, registered the creeping withdrawal, the missed calls, the increasingly vague excuses, the growing silence. He tried not to overthink it, knowing Connor had weathered a storm. Yet a quiet ache settled in his chest, a familiar companion whenever Connor seemed to slip away. He missed the easy laughter, the probing questions, the way Connor's presence infused his quiet apartment with vibrant energy. He missed the comfortable weight of Connor's unspoken thoughts, the trust that had blossomed between them. He sent fewer texts, his own attempts at connection dwindling as Connor's responsiveness waned. He understood the need for space, but the growing chasm between them felt less like a natural distance and more like a deliberate retreat. He wondered if he had overstepped, if his quiet attentiveness had been misinterpreted, if his own burgeoning feelings had somehow become transparent, frightening Connor away. The thought was a bitter swallow, but he knew better than to push. He would wait, as he always had. Empty spaces. Connor swiped left, a sigh heaved from a place too deep for a Tuesday night. Another pristine profile, or another curated collection of photos, and a bio that read more like a shopping list for a partner than a glimpse into a person. 4 weeks into his rebound experiment, a glib label for his bewildered mother, the returns were meager. Each date, a meticulous ballet of feigned interest, left him feeling increasingly hollow. First, there was Amelia, whose laugh boomed a little too loudly, and whose impressive career always found its way back into conversation. Connor offered polite nods and affirmations. His mind, however, drifted to Elias's hushed chuckles, the way his eyes would crinkle at the corners when Connor spun a particularly absurd tale. He recalled the effortless rhythm of their banter, how Elias seemed to anticipate his next thought, completing his sentences with uncanny precision. Amelia, for all her drive, he felt like a stranger reciting a script. Then came David, a personal trainer whose biceps strained against his shirt and whose passion for macros was boundless. They met for coffee, a neutral ground Connor had deliberately chosen to sidestep the intensity of a full dinner. David spoke animatedly about protein shakes and morning runs, while Connor nursed his lukewarm latte, acutely aware of the vast silence whenever David paused. It was a stark contrast to the comfortable quiet he'd shared with Elias, moments steeped in mutual understanding where words were often superfluous. With David, the stillness felt immense and cold, an impassable chasm. He ventured into a dinner date with Chloe, a vibrant artist whose studio apartment exuded a faint aroma of turpentine and lavender. She was witty, insightful, and undeniably captivating. Their conversation flowed for hours. Art, travel, the very meaning of life. Yet, as the evening waned, Connor found himself searching her eyes for a specific spark, a depth of connection that remained stubbornly absent. With a jolt, he realized he was searching for Elias. He longed for the way Elias's gaze could hold his, conveying 1,000 unspoken sentiments, a quiet knowing that transcended mere dialogue. Chloe, for all her allure, felt like a beautifully rendered canvas that hadn't quite come to life. Each subsequent encounter felt like an audition where he was both the reluctant director and the uninspired actor. He'd sit across from these carefully selected strangers, forcing smiles, making small talk, all the while a persistent ache pulsed beneath his ribs. It wasn't just a craving for companionship, it was a specific, undeniable yearning for Elias. He missed the way Elias would truly listen, his attention a warm, enveloping comfort. He missed their late-night talks, the familiar weight of Elias's arm brushed against his on the sofa, the effortless synchronicity of their minds. His apartment, once a haven of quiet reflection, now felt cavernous and empty. The silence, once a solace, had become a mocking echo. He'd find himself reaching for his phone, fingers hovering over Elias's contact, only to pull back, a fresh wave of apprehension washing over him. What could he possibly say? How could he explain this bewildering, terrifying shift within him? He spent evenings alone, not writing, not reading, just staring at the wall, a profound sense of isolation settling. He felt adrift, cut loose from his moorings. The women he dated, the men he chatted with online, they were all just placeholders, temporary distractions from the gaping chasm that had opened in his life. He was attempting to fill a void with superficial connections, but the void was unmistakably Elias-shaped, and nothing else seemed to fit its contours. The loneliness wasn't merely a lack of company. It was the absence of a specific soul, a familiar laughter, a quiet, unwavering presence. He was surrounded by people, yet without Elias, he felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. The memory of a touch. The sharp clang of dishes in his empty kitchen underscored the apartment's oppressive quiet, a stark contrast to the lively cafe where he'd just navigated another polite, passionless conversation. Amelia, with her earnest heart, had expounded on her burgeoning succulent collection, and Connor had found himself nodding, a fixed, vacant smile on his face, his thoughts drifting to Elias's effortless presence. He'd genuinely tried to engage, to find some spark, but his well of enthusiasm had run dry. He leaned against the cool granite, the lingering scent of stale coffee clinging to his shirt. His eyes snagged on a framed photograph on the fridge, a candid shot from his engagement day with Sarah. He was mid-laugh, head thrown back, Sarah's arm linked through his. The joy had been palpable then, a tangible force, making him feel utterly complete, his future a perfectly paved path. An unbidden, insistent memory flickered, eclipsing the photograph's cheerful facade. It was from weeks after the cancellation, when his world felt like a crumbling edifice. He'd been on Elias's worn leather sofa, a half-empty mug of tea forgotten. Tears had erupted without warning, an overwhelming wave of grief and confusion. He'd felt raw, exposed, utterly stripped bare. Elias, true to his nature, hadn't offered platitudes or rushed comfort. He'd simply been there. Connor recalled Elias shifting closer, a silent anchor in his storm. Then, a feather-light touch, so gentle it barely registered, as Elias's thumb brushed his cheek, catching a tear. It wasn't pitying, nor dramatic. It was simply soft, understanding, a silent acknowledgement of his pain, devoid of judgment or expectation. At the time, Connor had registered it as a kind, friendly gesture, a testament to their deep, platonic bond. Elias was always thoughtful. Swept up in his own turbulent emotions, he'd thought nothing more of it. But now, in his apartment's quiet solitude, the memory replayed, each detail sharpened, imbued with a newfound significance. The warmth of that touch wasn't merely friendly, it was something else entirely. It was a current, a subtle electricity that had arced between them, a silent language spoken in the space between their skin. He could almost feel it again. The ghost of that pressure, the faint roughness of Elias's thumb against his damp skin. It wasn't the fleeting contact of a stranger or the perfunctory pat of an acquaintance. It was intimate, profoundly so, a whisper of connection bypassing words altogether. A sudden, dizzying wave of realization washed over him, stealing his breath. That touch, seemingly innocuous then, was now a beacon, illuminating a truth he'd stubbornly refused to see. Elias offered not just comfort, but a profound sense of belonging. Not just understanding, but a deep, resonant empathy that reached into his core. He hadn't just lost a fiancé, he'd been offered a glimpse of a different kind of love, one he hadn't known existed, and he'd foolishly, fearfully, pulled away. The void he'd felt after each disappointing date wasn't just the absence of companionship, it was the specific, aching absence of Elias. The effortless understanding, the quiet solace, the way Elias saw past his bluster into his vulnerability. These weren't just qualities he admired in a friend. They were the very foundations of what he now understood he longed for in a partner. His hands, resting on the counter, clenched into fists. He'd been so busy trying to reconstruct the life he thought he wanted, so determined to fit himself back into the mold of the straight, engaged man, that he'd walked away from the most authentic, soul-deep connection he'd ever known. He hadn't just lost Elias as a friend, he'd lost the chance to explore a connection that was vibrant, real, and terrifyingly beautiful. The memory of that touch, once a simple act of kindness, now felt like a profound confession. A silent promise he hadn't known how to keep. A profound, aching regret settled deep in his chest. He needed Elias. Not just as a friend, but in a way that scared him and exhilarated him all at once. He needed Elias, romantically, in every sense of the word. The journey back. The silence of Connor's apartment pressed in on him, a physical weight that mirrored the hollowness in his chest. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to underscore his isolation, a relentless countdown to an unknown future he suddenly felt utterly unprepared for. The faint scent of stale coffee and unread paperbacks, remnants of a life he'd been so sure of just weeks ago, now felt alien, almost mocking. He walked aimlessly from the living room to the kitchen, then back again, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The carefully curated art on the walls, the plush rug beneath his feet, all of it was just decor, devoid of the warmth that had once imbued them with meaning. He stopped by the window, staring out at the city lights twinkling indifferent below. He saw nothing, felt nothing but a gnawing ache, a profound sense of being adrift. He'd tried to fill the void, dates with women whose laughter felt brittle, conversations that skimmed the surface, never quite reaching the depths he now craved. He'd sought solace in old routines, in the familiar clink of glasses at his usual pub. But the camaraderie felt forced, the jokes hollow. Every attempt to distract himself, to move forward, only amplified the realization that the missing piece wasn't a puzzle piece at all, but a person. Elias. The thought, once a whisper, was now a roar in his head, drowning out all other considerations. He needed Elias. Not as a friend to commiserate with, not as a confidant for broken dreams, but as an anchor, a compass. The very heart of the home he was desperately trying to build within himself. The admission was terrifying, humbling, and utterly liberating. He finally understood the quiet longing that had settled in his bones whenever Elias was absent, the inexplicable joy that bloomed when he was near. It wasn't just comfort, It was love, a raw and undeniable. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat urging him forward. He had to go to him. Tonight. The urgency was a palpable thing, a fire kindled within him that demanded action. He snatched his keys from the hook by the door, his movements jerky, driven by a primal need. He didn't bother changing out of his worn t-shirt and jeans. Presentation was irrelevant. Honesty, however brutal, was all that mattered. The drive across town was a blur of streetlights and passing cars. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, his jaw clenched. Fear, sharp and cold, pricked at him. Fear of rejection, fear of misunderstanding, fear of shattering the fragile equilibrium they had, even now, maintained. But beneath the fear was a current of resolve, stronger than anything he'd ever felt. He couldn't live with the regret of not trying. He couldn't go another day pretending he didn't know what his heart truly wanted. He pulled up outside Elias's apartment building, the familiar brick facade looming in the dim glow of the street lamp. His stomach churned, a knot of nerves tightening with each breath. He cut the engine, plunging the car into silence, save for the frantic thumping of his own pulse. He stared at the third-story window, a sliver of light escaping through the blinds. Was Elias awake? Was he reading, writing, thinking of him? Taking a deep, shaky breath, Connor pushed open the car door and stepped out. The cool night air did little to calm his racing thoughts. He walked towards the entrance, each step a deliberate act of courage. The elevator ride felt interminable, the ascent a metaphor for the profound shift occurring within him. When the doors finally chimed open on Elias's floor, Connor hesitated for only a second. He stood before Elias's door, his hand hovering over the cool metal of the doorknob. The quiet hum of the building surrounded him, amplifying the frantic rhythm of his own heart. He imagined Elias inside, perhaps curled up with a book, oblivious to the seismic shift about to occur. He closed his eyes, picturing Elias's gentle smile, the crinkle around his eyes when he laughed, the quiet strength that had always been his anchor. This was it. There was no turning back. He had to be honest, had to lay bare the truth that had taken so long to surface. With a fresh surge of determination, he lifted his hand and knocked. A truth-spoken city light streaked past Connor's window, a vibrant blur of yellow and red against the deepening indigo. His grip on the wheel was a white-knuckled vice, the engine's thrum a counterpoint to his heart's frantic beat. Each block dissolved under his tires, an inexorable advance toward a precipice. The conviction he'd felt in his apartment now wrestled with a rising tide of dread. What if he'd misread everything? What if Elias didn't reciprocate? Could this confession shatter their precious bond, leaving him more isolated than ever? He crushed the doubts, his resolve hardening, retreating to the sterile emptiness. The tiresome pretense was no longer an option. He craved this truth, for both their sakes. He pulled up to the familiar curb, the old oak tree casting long, dancing shadows across Elias's building. The single light in Elias's living room glowed a soft, inviting yellow, a solitary beacon in the encroaching twilight. Killing the engine plunged him into a sudden, deafening silence. A wave of dizziness, a physical manifestation of his turmoil, washed over him. He drew a slow, deliberate breath, then another, trying to anchor himself. This was it. No turning back. He walked the short path, the worn concrete stretching impossibly long beneath his feet. At the door, his hand hovered over the bell, a silent battle raging within. The urge to flee, to retreat into the safe harbor of his solitude, was almost overpowering. But the image of Elias's kind eyes, the memory of his patient listening, the quiet strength he exuded, it tethered Connor, pulling him forward. He pressed the doorbell. The chime resonated in the quiet hallway, startlingly loud. Connor shifted his weight, his gaze riveted to the door. Faint movement stirred inside. then the click of the lock. The door eased open, revealing Elias, a book still in his hand, a look of mild surprise on his face. His hair was slightly disheveled, and the soft lamplight from within cast a warm glow on his features. He looked domestic, comfortable, utterly unprepared for the storm about to break. "Connor!" Elias's voice was soft, laced with curiosity. "Is everything all right? It's a bit late for a visit." Connor swallowed hard, his throat suddenly parched. He met Elias's gaze directly, forcing himself to hold it. He saw concern bloom in those intelligent eyes, a subtle shift as Elias registered the intensity of Connor's expression. He drew a deep, shuddering breath, the cool night air filling his lungs, stealing him. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat demanding release. He had to say it now. "Elias," Connor began, his voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor running through him. He took a small step closer, needing the proximity, needing to convey the depth of his feeling. He watched Elias's brow furrow slightly, sensing the gravity of the moment. Connor's eyes, usually so quick to deflect, to charm, were now raw, vulnerable, holding nothing back. I can't pretend anymore. I can't live like this. Not another second." The words tumbled out, each a release, a brick falling from the wall he'd built around himself for years. He watched Elias's eyes widen almost imperceptibly, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even trepidation, crossing his face. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the distant hum of the city. Connor braced himself, ready for anything, for rejection, for confusion, for anything but the continued silence of his own heart. He took another breath, deeper this time, and the truth, the singular, undeniable truth that had been clawing at him for weeks, finally broke free, clear and unwavering. His voice, though still laced with a fragile tremor, was resolute. "Elias, I love you. I'm in love with you." The confession hung in the air between them, a fragile, explosive thing. Elias's eyes, usually so composed, searched Connor's face, a complex mixture of emotions swirling within their depths: shock, disbelief, and something else. Something hopeful that Connor dared not name. The book in Elias's hand slipped, hitting the floor with a soft thud, a tiny punctuation mark to the monumental silence that followed. A silent promise. The thud of the dropped book echoed in the sudden silence, a stark punctuation to Connor's confession. Elias's eyes, wide with surprise a moment ago, softened, the green depths shimmering with an emotion Connor couldn't quite decipher. A beat passed, then two, stretching into an eternity where Connor's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of hope and terror. He braced himself for rejection, for the uncomfortable shifting, for the inevitable apologies and the irreparable chasm that would open between them. But none of that came. Instead, a slow, gentle smile began to bloom on Elias's face, starting at the corners of his eyes and spreading to his lips. A quiet dawn breaking over a landscape Connor had feared was forever shrouded in twilight. It wasn't a wide, boisterous grin, but a subtle, tender expression that melted some of the ice around Connor's own heart. It was a smile that spoke volumes without a single word, a silent affirmation that eased the suffocating dread in Connor's chest. Then, Elias moved. He didn't speak, didn't offer a platitude or an explanation. He simply reached out, his hand extending across the small space separating them on the sofa. His fingers, long and slender, found Connor's where they rested, clenched tightly on his knee. Elias's touch was light, almost feather-like, a tentative exploration. Connor's breath hitched, his gaze locked on their joined hands, a silent tableau of uncertainty and burgeoning possibility. Elias's thumb brushed softly over the back of Connor's knuckles, a small, comforting caress that sent a jolt of warmth through him. It was a language without words, a quiet declaration that bypassed the need for grand pronouncements. Connor's own hand, and still tense and rigid, began to relax under Elias's gentle persuasion. His fingers uncurled slowly, responding instinctively to the unspoken invitation. And then, Elias's grip tightened, a silent, reassuring squeeze that resonated deep within Connor's soul. It wasn't a forceful clutch, but a tender, firm pressure, a promise held within the simple gesture. It was a silent promise of shared feelings, a mutual understanding that transcended the fear and the unspoken questions. In that squeeze, Connor felt a wave of relief so profound it nearly brought him to his knees. It was an acknowledgement, a reciprocation, a quiet acceptance of the raw, vulnerable truth he had just laid bare. The weight of the world, which had pressed down on him for weeks, lifted, replaced by a lightness he hadn't known was possible. Elias's eyes, still holding that gentle smile, met his, and in their depths, Connor saw a reflection of his own burgeoning hope, a mirroring of the profound tenderness that had begun to blossom between them. There were no fireworks, no dramatic declarations, just this quiet, profound connection woven into the fabric of their intertwined hands. The air in the room, previously thick with unspoken tension, now hummed with a different kind of energy, one of nascent possibility and gentle anticipation. The future, which had seemed a terrifying abyss moments ago, now stretched before them, not fully illuminated, but no longer dark. It was a landscape they would navigate together, hand in hand, one silent promise at a time. The dropped book lay forgotten on the floor, a testament to the abrupt shift in their reality, a discarded artifact of the past. All that mattered was this moment, this shared touch, this quiet, undeniable beginning. Connor squeezed back, a silent echo of Elias's gesture, a confirmation that he understood, that he felt it too. Their hands remained clasped, a tangible link between their two hearts, beating now in a rhythm that felt profoundly, beautifully aligned. The silence that had once felt so heavy was now comfortable, filled with the unspoken truths that had finally found their voice, not through words, but through the simple, powerful language of touch. It was more than he had dared to hope for, more meaningful than any grand declaration could have been. It was Elias, in his quiet, profound way, saying yes. And in that yes, Connor found not just acceptance, but a profound sense of coming home.